So as you can see, this is a collaborative work. So it's not just me, even though it's me who is mainly giving the talk today. Um, and I would like to begin with a quote from a book that I had with me when I was on board of Vortelius during this expedition to Edgeøya in 2022. The book was written by a Chinese American anthropologist who is very active in the field of environmental anthropology and multi-species ethnography, Anna Tsing, who says, "We are contaminated by our encounters. They change who we are as we make way for others." This was a book that I had with me, and I was reading it on the way, and it helped me understand what was happening in me, around me, and it nudged me in unexpected directions. And I loved this idea of Anat saying about encounters, so meeting the other, be it another scientist, a tourist, be it an animal, a plant, a landscape, as something that contaminates me. In hard sciences, we often think about contamination as if it were something bad. It's a negative thing. It's something polluting. It's something dangerous, something that should be avoided. But in this multi-species ethnography perspective, we're thinking about encountering the other as something natural, something that helps us live and develop, become someone better, maybe. And contamination is simply this very exciting process of meeting the otherness, the diversity, and having to react, adapt, embrace. So this is a different view how you can consider contamination. And it also, I think, dismantles the artificial barrier between us and them. So we become ourselves as we collaborate with others, as we make way for their life projects, and they help us do what we wish to flourish and to thrive. So this is just a prelude to the work that I'm going to present. The talk is structured in three main parts. First, I thought it would be handy if I told you something about the project within which this work was conducted and about the actual SIOS expedition, and then Martha will say more because it's kind of his baby. And then I'll talk about the interface. Now, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look at the web page. I will show you very briefly. We certainly don't have time to go through it during the webinar. If you want to explore it fully, I think you can spend on it like 50 minutes. So this is not a TikTok product. It requires some time also from the user. So I'll show you a bit what it's like and what is included. And then there will be a wrap up or a kind of a conclusion where I'll try to pull the threads of where I think this work is contributing. And these two images, I think, also illustrate nicely what the project of Svalbard was about. Here you have maybe you can say a contrast of images from not even the bird's perspective, but from space, Svalbard from space, the newest image I could find on social media. And an image that was taken by the expedition's photographer, a very talented one, by the way, Dagmara Wojtanowicz, where she's taking picture of something that I think Ingeborg was studying, one of the scientists who is also here in the Zoom meeting. And thanks for that. So this is very much zoom in and zoom out, different kinds of different orders of evidence and layers of knowledge. Okay, so now a few words about Svalbard, which was a project that was funded by Belmont Forum. Usually these projects have very long names that no one then can remember, so you need to write them down. Understanding Resilience and Long-Term Environmental Change in the High Arctic. And a subtitle was Narrative-Based Analysis from Svalbard. And that's the project on which I worked as a postdoc prior to my current employment. And it was a very visionary project that was, I can say, certainly interdisciplinary because we were people from very wide range of disciplines in the team, but also transdisciplinary in the sense that we were working with non-academic partners. And SIOS, I think, was one of the partners in the field that we were most in touch with. I'm not quite sure what it was that we came up with together in this collaboration, but it certainly was an exciting and contaminating encounter. Maybe not so many tangible products that came out of it, but it was certainly a very interesting conversation. It was a project about, we can say, environmental memory of Svalbard. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, you are certainly all aware that there are very many long-term monitoring programs running in Svalbard. So different teams, different institutions, different spots monitor over a long period of time different environmental factors. And these things are being measured. The data is being recorded in some standardized way. And SIOS is one of the infrastructures that um, documents, records all these different long-term data series so that they can be used further. So this is kind of like exact science contribution to how we remember how an environment is changing. But then you also have all the other registers of remembering how an environment is changing, which, and here you touch upon the human aspect, kind of all the people that either have been living in Svalbard for a long time or they keep visiting over decades, tour guides or scientists that visit the same places over a long period of time. And they also observe and they have a very physical embodied knowledge what it feels like when you are revisiting a place that is environmental change. So we try to consider the contributions of both that you can kind of see as separate, but as we discovered within the project, they're not that separate at all. Scientific knowledge on one side generated by these monitoring programs, but also knowledge from what we call everyday life or embodied knowledge that can come from residents, tour guides, but also, all of these people that help science come about, the technicians, the science, those who support all the infrastructure and the logistics. Those are also people that have very rich subjective environmental knowledge about the change in the environments. The project was led by René van der Waal from University of Uppsala, and the Dutch work package was led by Marta Lonen, who is here with us today. So you could say the project was about what happens when scientific knowledge encounters everyday knowledge. And then there was SIOS, which was this exciting Netherlands scientific expedition Edgeøya Svalbard that happened in July 22. And one of its aims was to generate knowledge about a vulnerable environment in change, which is Svalbard, or the particular island of Edgeøya, and other landing sites. One of the aims also was to connect new data collected during this trip in 22 to earlier monitoring or measurement programs. That was a Dutch overwintering season or monitoring fieldwork season in the 70s, and there was another SIOS expedition in 2015. So there were points in the past to which we wanted to connect. The aspect of connecting had, again, more layers. So it was also about connecting researchers and tourists that were called science supporters when we were on board. So we were about 50 researchers, about 30 paying clients, and about 12 policymakers and politicians, that were journalists, that was a TV crew, and also, of course, there were the members of the actual ship or vessel crew, I think about 50 people. And Marta was the scientific coordinator, so I would like to give the word to him now for a second to tell us more.
Yeah, just a small contribution. We have a website which is also saas.nl, SAAS.nl. It's mainly in Dutch, I'm sorry, but it was bringing all the people who had interest in the expedition together. For me personally, the most important thing was that I was more and more focusing on monitoring. And so I got to know the old data set, and I thought doing it new, collecting new data, that would be a great possibility of registering change in an area which is not monitored that well. Let's say the best monitoring was in 1977 in summer, which was related to our visits in summer also in 2015 and 2022. Getting money for the expedition started as a really difficult thing. I came close, but I never got it until there was leftover money of the latest International Polar Year for public outreach. And so that's where we started in 2015. The whole expedition was, apart from the science and the interactions and the contaminations, as Zdenka calls it, was also very big in outreach. We got, for instance, a whole week on the national news at 8 o'clock, which is the main news during the evening, an attention on Spitsbergen and Svalbard, what's happening over there. And also in 2022, they really did good work, the journalists on board. And so many articles have been written, but also, yeah, it was very interesting. And Natalie Steins, who's also in this group, she's just making a paper on everything what was produced as knowledge from the expedition. One of the things is that actually in 2015, everything went on very easily. 2022 had a strange start in the sense that we couldn't land because of the weather or because of polar bears on land. And we even had an evacuation because the polar bear was coming. And all these things changed a little bit the expedition, especially for me. Because we got some tourists who said, "Why am I on this boat? I could have done it differently too." But then in the end, we did have beautiful landings. And one of the strange things of the whole expedition is that the atmosphere really changed enormously, in that everybody was happy with what was done when we reached Longyearbyen again. But at the moment, we're still working on scientific papers who's coming out. We got some extra money for people to work on that, and things are coming on, and they are all mentioned on the website. Thank you, Zdenka.
Okay, thanks, Martha. You didn't mention that it was also very much your contribution that I think 6 social scientists and humanities scholars were included among these 50 researchers, because that's a rare thing. Normally, you get almost 100% of natural scientists that embark these scientific expeditions, but it was Martin's genuine interest and being intrigued by what social science can bring in that he encouraged social scientists to join. So I was one of the privileged ones who could join, to look at what happens when scientific measurements encounter human interest. Okay, let me back to the slides. Okay, now a few sentences about the actual interface, which, yeah, you can say it's a website. What it does is that it offers different kinds of materials that are created through applying an ethnographic method that I used during the expedition for exploration to the audience. So I don't have any charts, any tables, any numbers, but I have lots of photos, I have some videos, I have a lot of notes in my fieldwork diary. I have fieldwork diaries of my participants, so the people who worked with me, and maybe their drawings, their images, excerpts from their posts on social media. I have interviews with my participants before the expedition, during and after. So this is a huge range, a variety of materials that maybe are not that, it's not that clear to someone who maybe doesn't come from the realm of social science. What kind of data is it that an ethnographer works with? So the interface displays them for an exploration that is nonlinear. So it's not that you need to have a look at the data in a particular row, but you can explore it as you wish. I call it tells a story that is still unfolding. But it also hopefully raises some questions. So one of them is, for example, what is it that we can learn about different ways of knowing through ethnographic methods? So this speaks to the question, why would it make sense to include ethnography among the disciplines or methods that are applied? But also, on a meta level, how can digital technology, so in this case, a reflexive interface, contribute to our understanding of knowledge? And here I want to highlight just a question that I want to table. Is there a difference between knowledge and understanding? And I would claim ethnography is probably stronger when it comes to helping us come to an understanding of the phenomenon. So here my question is, what happens when ethnography of science, or ethnography, which I conducted, encounters this digital beast of the interface that's completely out of my hands, and it was other people, my collaborators, that worked on that thing. Okay, so this is the first kind of scene, or the opening scene of the interface. Now I'll stop sharing my slides, and I was thinking I could just briefly share my screen where I could go directly to to the interface online. The design is such that there are some clickable elements on each scene. For example, here this about, so there are several layers within the interface that you can explore. The main storyline kind of is provided by an audio storytelling file where each scene is accompanied by my voice being recorded when I give you kind of a clue or I guide you through that particular scene. And here there is this hamburger menu, and you have 12 what we call scenes. So these are different themes, areas of interest that I distilled from the data or identified as an emerging theme. And we try to make the interface somehow playful so that it engages people. I can show you, for example, this scene that is on climate change. You have these moving elements, these figures, and you can click on them and they will tell you what they told me when I asked them about science, about climate change, so randomly.
In Svalbard, a temperature increase of between 2.1 and 5.4 degrees has been measured over the past 20 years. Climate change has also led to clear changes in nature. The glaciers are melting, the permafrost is shrinking, polar bears are changing their diet, new species are coming. At the same time, we humans create environmental toxins and plastic carried to the Arctic via air and sea currents, and mass tourism causes the wear and tear of the vulnerable vegetation and local pollution. Despite the good intention of documenting the effects of climate change and other human activities, we researchers are unfortunately also part of this problem.
So you can see here that reflexivity features in these accounts. So these are not just cold statements, but people often reflect on, for example, their own role in what is going on. Uncertainty and doubt, okay, it has the same layout. So you have these moving elements that you can click on and hear or learn, read more. Let me think. There is, for example, a video that currently Henrik provided me with. And then there is a story narrated. And again, you could click on something and then it shows. Does it show anything to you at this moment? I don't see, and now it's loading. Okay, so it's a bit slow. We have some technical glitches when it comes to the interface, so it might be that when you're exploring it, some things might not work as they should. So I apologize for that. Anyway, now you have had a very brief idea of the modes of exploration that you can use when you browse the interface, and I'll go back to the slides. Okay. So there are these different scenes within the interface. I think I told you there are 12, but I also try to distill what are the meta themes of the work. So what does this speak to most, or what does it reveal? And I came up with three different themes. One of them is uncertainty. It's interesting to think about uncertainty when we discuss science, because at one point science is based in doubting and critical approach. So there is always like a fiber of uncertainty in science. At the same time, we are expecting science to deliver results or findings, knowledge that will help us beat uncertainty, become more certain. So there is a tension within this. And in addition, there is also a different approach towards uncertainty, I think, when it comes to mainstream natural science and social science humanities, in the sense that in social sciences and humanities, you are kind of methodologically trained to pay attention to uncertainty, work with it, kind of embrace it, and don't get discouraged by, these claims for objectivity. As a social scientist or humanities scholar, you acknowledge that you are subjective and you work with it. You reflect on your positionality, and that's just fine. That's how things are, and it's valid also for natural scientists. But maybe it's not that common that you reflect on this positionality and all these different, ethical, political questions that come in when it comes to your research that presumably should be pure, cold, distant, and objective. But there are interesting authors in anthropology that say interesting stuff about uncertainty. For example, Tsing, that I already quoted, noticing these clashing components of uncertain phenomena. You accept that your work is open-ended. It is not scalable. This is a huge difference, that anthropological research per se is not scalable. I was looking at what was happening there. I mean, I can bring in some understanding that maybe can be a clue for understanding something else as well, but I cannot generalize like plainly. Or Hastrup, which is a great Danish anthropologist, who says that anthropology is on the edge between reasonable certainty about the workings of the world and the manifest uncertainties just beyond the horizon. So reasonable certainty, what does that mean? I'm not making up what's going on. It's not completely random, but also it's open-ended, and there are different voices and ways of how you present what you have manifested or documented or studied. And this again clashes somehow with the mainstream narrative of what field measurements or scientific field measurements are, because they're supposed to shut down uncertainty. Liboiron, which is a science and technology studies author, coins this term anticipatory temporality, which means that we believe we can choose what kind of future we want to make happen, and that we can direct the present toward this desired future through management practices. Okay, that's a very different take from this open-endedness and being open up to what might happen and alternative futures also. So uncertainty in its various facets is featured in the interface as it's conceptualized by Tsing, but also reflected by myself and by my participants. Here I'm just throwing in there some questions that you might want to think about when you're, I don't know, taking a shower tonight or having breakfast tomorrow morning. What is the role of uncertainty in science? And what is the role of uncertainty in life? I don't think we can do without. Another theme that I identify and speak to with the interface is layeredness of knowledge. So here you have some examples of how you can think about what does it mean, different layers of knowledge. So here you have a protocol that the scientist Ann-Kristin Schartau, who was so kind to allow me to be with her in the field, the protocol that she wrote about her particular measurement fieldwork site. A picture that Dagmara Wojtanowicz took of the scientist when she was filling in the protocol. You also have here a conference poster that Ann-Kristin and her colleague presented at the Svalbard Science Conference. So this is kind of the scientific outcome of this particular work. And then you have a scene from my interface where I have included other images, recordings, notes that also speak to the very same scientific field measurement that took place during the expedition. How can we think about layeredness of knowledge? There are more ways. For example, thinking about big data, stuff that you can, for example, download from satellites, and thick data, that is basically what I'm featuring in the interface, these ethnographic, deep and rich accounts, but they're on small stuff. They're always very situated and localized. When we talk about knowledge infrastructures, which is the field of Anne, we can say that these infrastructures always try to order different kinds of evidence, and these layers of knowledge that always exist, they're always present, might be obscured, on purpose. We might want to hide some stuff to make things more standardized. There is a quote from a book that is actually on morality in tourism that I like, which is that the representation of research site is always of moral consideration. You construct the story that you tell of your own data. So each of us, no matter from which discipline we come, we have to make this moral decision of how we want to present our data. What is the story that we're going to narrate based in the data that we created or collected in the field? And ethnography just depends on stories. It not only relies, it depends on them. But these are not instructions for you how you should understand the world, but they're clues. So you get like a hint. And if you grasp the story, you kind of understand what's going on, but it's not straightforward. There is this process of interpretation, there is the meeting, the storytelling moment, the mediation. There's lots going on when the meaning is being created. Stories are built through layered and disparate practices of knowing and being. And so this layeredness of knowledge, apart from the accounts that speak to it directly in the materials, it's also the design, these different layers that you can discover if you want and click on elements in the scenes that bring you to another layer if you wish to dig deeper. Another question that I don't have an answer to, okay, what is it that we want or need from knowledge infrastructures, and what is it that they want or need from us? Why do we choose to hide the stuff that we do? Each of us, even me, when I'm telling you the story about my work during SIOS, I'm hiding something, and there is a reasoning behind. So I think it's interesting to ask ourselves these questions. Why do we choose to hide what we hide? This is an image that Ingeborg beautifully drew in her fieldwork diary about the bear that Martin hinted that was there. We couldn't see him when we were sampling, and then it definitely triggered an action, this evacuation from the fieldwork site. So this speaks to the last theme, which is invisible collaborations. So both visible and invisible, which I think is a key theme, both for science in general, certainly for team science, and for also disciplinary, but especially transdisciplinary work. So it was a topic for the research of Svalbard, that I told you, remember this project about environmental memory, and also for the expedition cruise that I was part of. I think to focus on collaborations, those that are more noticeable and less acknowledged, is really important so that we can contribute to a livable future. But often they're being hidden in the name of, objectivity and reproducibility and scalability, representativity. So the exactness of science often wants us to hide all these relationships that are in the background. Law and Lin, which again comes from STS, say that things, and there they include objects, people, texts, ideas, animals, natural phenomena, so it's very broad. They're shaped in a web of relations, or even we can say they are a web of relations. So that's also the focus of my ethnography as I displayed in the interface. So again, these collaborations feature as a theme in the website. And another tricky question that I want to throw in is, what are the actual conditions that we have for collaboration in science? And now you can be thinking, scientist to scientist, but also maybe transdisciplinary, but even beyond the human realm. What are the conditions for collaboration that is more than human within science? And here I come to the wrap up, kind of. So what is this website, or reflexive interface, as we call it, Contaminating Encounters? Well, it's an exercise in reflexive ethnography of knowledge production and knowledge sharing in an epoch that you might want to call the Anthropocene or not. So I explore this theme of contaminating encounters in this, what you can call an ecosystem of a scientific expedition, where you have various actors. So it's these different, the crew, the staff, the guides, the scientists, the tourists, even the virus of COVID was an actor because it did impact us, or the polar bears that were all around the place, or the landscape, even the place. You can think of the place as an actor that is performing their roles, and they're reflecting on them. When it comes to humans, we can even ask them how they reflect, so then it's easier to capture. And they're also making way for others to perform their roles or not. That's also something that we encountered, that there were frictions, that some people wanted to pursue their goals more than others. And then, there are different hierarchies and negotiations going on. And there's also a scene on that in the interface. What we tried to do with this website was that we wanted to highlight engagement, different sensory layers. For example, there is a last scene, which is called Epilogue, where you can click on an ice floe and listen to the sound of the crackling ice that I recorded when I was on a Zodiac tour, so that it allows you to immerse in that experience, kind of, through the data that I share with you. And it's these three themes that you can explore from different angles when having a look at the interface. Uncertainty as something that you definitely can cover up, both in science in particular, but also in life in general. but you don't delete it. It remains present. And maybe it's fascinating to sometimes unveil, have a look. What is there actually when it comes to uncertainty? You know, in science, it can be all kinds of improvisation, the fieldwork stress, kind of the fact that you always have to adapt to the actual conditions and you cannot plan very much ahead. You take the measurement and you're not certain whether you did it right according to the protocol. You know, there are loads of that out there and also in the interface. Layeredness of knowledge, but here I want to highlight, I forgot to mention that earlier, I don't think about layers as if they were like stacked one after another, you know, one covering kind of fully the other. But here I quote Tim Ingold, who published a book in 23 that is called The Rise and Fall of Generation Now. And he argues that we should, that's also how we study, you know, history or the history of science even, as if people's contributions were stacked one above the other. But he invites us to think about science, history, whatever, human endeavor, as if these different contributions were tiny fibers of the very same rope. So they're all woven in. So that's also how I'm thinking about the layeredness of knowledge. And then these invisible collaborations, which is, I think, what actually makes the world of science livable and also more than human. That's what allows us to see beyond the horizon of just kind of what's being called the human dimension or humanity, because we're sharing this world with many other sentient beings than just humans. So what is it that actually helps us embrace uncertainty? Is it knowledge? Is it like hardcore scientific knowledge? Or is it relationships? I don't think it's either or. Maybe it's both, but none of them should be given precedence, or maybe in some cases, this is really an open question. And this is a wrap-up of the wrap-up. So why am I telling you this? I'm very grateful that SIOS allows us to present this work, because maybe it's slightly unconventional when it comes to what normally is being presented in these SIOS webinars. But I just wanted to raise this question for this particular audience. So why? Okay, or maybe without the why first. Do we need social science in research on environmental change? If you have the feeling after this talk or after exploring the interface that there is something to it, like some interesting stuff that could be told through these different methods, then why? Why is it? What is the benefit? And I think that the strength of social sciences and also humanities is that these people are trained to question assumed truths. We want to focus on sociality, so different ways in which people and not only people mingle and get in touch with, connect, get contaminated. So these relationships, that's the focus of our work. And we are also keen to notice what is just accidentally or on purpose being hidden or unhinged or invisible, and trace those things down, and maybe discover that those features or phenomena play a role that is being neglected. And obviously that's like very trivial, but we apply different methods compared to disciplines from, for example, the realm of natural sciences, which naturally results with contributing with different kinds of findings, or even findings in quotation marks, because it's so much harder to say, you know, there was the Dutch Polar Day last week and I met there one participant of the expedition and he was like, so can you distill what your finding is from your project? What is it that you found out? You're certainly able to do that. And I like to be challenged in that way, but you also realize how difficult that is when you're supposed to summarize something in a crisp way that maybe can become a newspaper headline. When I'm actually wanting to say something about relationships and uncertainty and layeredness of knowledge, doesn't sound that spectacular. But I think if you dedicate the time and attention to that, you find that it does say something important about how we work and how we, for example, produce knowledge about environmental change. So hopefully these kinds of people and this kind of understanding that is cultivated by social science and humanities can bring richer and more critical knowledge.